My coach told everyone his player was faking a concussion, then forced him to keep playing while 40 parents watched. My brother Caleb hit the ground so hard during the third quarter that I heard the impact from the bleachers. The sound cut through all the noise, through the parents cheering and the referees' whistles and the marching band warming up on the sideline. Just this sick hollow thud like someone dropping a bowling ball on concrete. Caleb was our team's starting linebacker, and he'd been going for a tackle when the other team's running back lowered his helmet at the last second. Crown of his helmet went straight into Caleb's face mask. Physics did the rest. I was 15 and sitting with my best friend Whitney in the student section, but I jumped up immediately because something about that hit felt wrong. Different from all the other hard tackles I'd seen in 3 years of watching high school football. Caleb stayed down for maybe 5 seconds before trying to get up, but his legs weren't working right. He got to his knees and just froze there, swaying slightly like a building about to fall. The ref threw his arms up in an X to signal injury timeout, and everyone in the stadium went quiet. Coach Brennan jogged onto the field with his clipboard, not the athletic trainer. That should have been the first warning sign. Miss Holloway, our trainer, was supposed to evaluate any player who got hit in the head, but Coach waved her off before she could even leave the bench. He crouched down next to Caleb and I could see him talking, probably asking the standard questions. What day is it? What's the score? How many fingers am I holding up? From the bleachers, it looked like Caleb was answering, but I noticed his eyes kept drifting to the side like he couldn't quite focus. Coach stood up after maybe 30 seconds and signaled to the ref that his player was fine. He literally pulled Caleb to his feet by his face mask and walked him to the sideline with one hand on his shoulder pad. My mom grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. That's not right. He needs to be checked by medical. She started pushing past people to get down from the bleachers, and I followed her because I knew Caleb. I knew how he walked and how he carried himself, and the person Coach was leading off the field wasn't moving like my brother. His steps were too careful, like someone walking on ice in the dark. We made it to the fence that separated the stands from the field, just as Coach was sitting Caleb down on the bench. Miss Holloway tried approaching again with her assessment clipboard, but Coach literally stepped between her and Caleb. He's fine, Teresa. Just got his bell rung. Needs to shake it off, but he needs to be evaluated. Protocol requires that I check him for concussion symptoms before he can return to play. Coach's face went red the way it always did when someone questioned him. This is the state championship qualifier. We're up by 4 with 1 quarter left. I'm not pulling my best defensive player because he took a normal hit. The hit wasn't normal, Miss Holloway said quietly. I saw it from the sideline. That was helmet-to-helmet contact with significant force. He needs baseline testing. Brennan turned fully toward her now, and his voice dropped to something that sounded almost friendly but wasn't. You know how much I respect your work, Teresa, but I've been coaching football for 23 years. I know the difference between a real injury and a kid who needs a minute to catch his breath. Caleb's tough. He'll be back in the game before this timeout ends. My mom was yelling now, loud enough that people in the stands turned to look. That's my son, and he needs medical attention right now. Coach glanced up at us with this expression like we were annoying insects buzzing around his championship dreams. Your son is fine, Mrs. Donovan. This is why we don't let parents on the sideline. You don't understand the game. But we could see Caleb from where we stood, maybe 20 feet away through the chain link fence. He was sitting on the bench with his helmet in his lap, staring at nothing. Another player, his friend Julian, sat down next to him and said something. Caleb turned his head to look at Julian, but the movement was wrong, delayed, like his brain was processing everything through water. Then Caleb threw up. Not much. Just leaned forward and puked on his own cleats. This thin stream of yellow bile that splattered on the artificial turf. Julian jumped up and yelled for the trainer, but Coach was already there. He grabbed Caleb by the shoulder pad and pulled him upright. Get him some water. He's nervous about the game, that's all. Some kids get queasy under pressure. Miss Holloway pushed past Coach this time, ignoring his protests, and knelt in front of Caleb. She pulled out a pen light and tried to check his pupils, but Coach yanked her backward by her elbow. I said he's fine. She spun on him with fury in her eyes. He just vomited after taking a head injury. That's a classic concussion symptom. I'm required by law to evaluate him before he returns to play. You want me to tell the state licensing board you prevented me from doing my job? Coach's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Fine. Do your little test. But make it quick. We've got a game to win. The entire stadium was watching now. The ref had stopped the clock for the injury timeout, and both teams were standing on their respective sidelines looking over at the drama unfolding. Miss Holloway went through her assessment quickly, testing Caleb's balance, asking him questions, checking his vision. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see Caleb's responses were slow. He kept closing his eyes like the stadium lights hurt. When she asked him to stand and walk a straight line, he wobbled after 3 steps and had to catch himself on the bench. Miss Holloway stood up and spoke directly to Coach in a voice loud enough that nearby players could hear. He failed the sideline concussion test. Multiple indicators including nausea, dizziness, photosensitivity, and delayed response time. He cannot return to play tonight and needs to be transported to the hospital for a full evaluation. Coach stared at her for a long moment, and I watched his brain do the math. His best defensive player, the championship qualifier, 4th quarter with a 4-point lead. He looked at the scoreboard, then at the opposing team's sideline where their offense was ready to go back in. Then he looked at Caleb, who was sitting there with his eyes half closed, clearly in no condition to play football. And Coach made his choice. He's playing. The words hung in the air like something toxic. Miss Holloway's face went white. Excuse me? I said he's playing. He passed my evaluation and I'm the head coach. Your test is just a guideline. I'm exercising my judgment that he's fit to play. That's not how this works. I'm the certified athletic trainer and I have final say on medical decisions. Not in my program, you don't. Brennan turned to his assistant coach. Get Caleb's helmet back on. He's going back in. My mom was screaming now, really screaming, climbing the fence trying to get onto the field. Other parents were yelling too. Stop the game. Don't let him play. Call an ambulance. But the stadium security guards were already moving to keep parents off the field, forming a human barrier. One of them, Mr. Pacheco, who I'd known since elementary school, looked apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, Mrs. Donovan. You need to stay in the stands. Coach Brennan has authority over his players during the game. That's my son and he has a brain injury. Call 911. I can't do that unless medical staff requests it, and they haven't. We all looked at Miss Holloway, who was still standing toe-to-toe with Coach Brennan. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling 911 myself then. This is medical negligence. Coach grabbed her phone out of her hand. No, you're not. You're fired. Effective immediately. Get off my sideline. The assistant coaches looked shocked. A few players had stopped what they were doing to watch this confrontation. Julian stepped forward and addressed Coach directly. Sir, I don't think Caleb should play. He's not acting right. Coach rounded on him. You're a 17-year-old kid. You don't make medical decisions. Your job is to play football when I tell you to play football. But look at him. Julian pointed at Caleb, who still hadn't moved from the bench. He threw up and he can't stand up straight. If he goes back in the game, he's going to get hurt worse. Brennan's voice dropped to something dangerous. You questioning my coaching? You want to sit on the bench with your friend? Because I can make that happen. Both of you can watch from the sideline while we lose this game and miss our shot at states. Is that what you want? Julian looked at Caleb, then at Coach, then back at Caleb. You could see him processing the impossible choice. Stand up to Coach and get benched, maybe lose his scholarship opportunities, definitely face consequences, or stay silent and watch his friend get hurt. He chose silence. Stepped back to the defensive line where the other players were waiting. Every single one of them had seen Caleb get hit, had seen him throw up, had seen him fail the concussion test, and every single one of them looked away when Julian rejoined them. Coach walked over to Caleb and pulled him to his feet. Time to be a man about this. You want to win a championship or you want to be soft? Caleb's response was so quiet I couldn't hear it from the fence, but Coach laughed. That's my player. Now get your helmet on. Caleb put on his helmet with hands that shook. I watched him try to buckle the chin strap 3 times before he got it. Then Coach literally pushed him toward the field where the ref was waiting to restart play. My mom was still screaming, other parents joining her now. Maybe 40 people in the stands yelling for someone to stop this. But nobody did. The refs didn't intervene because Coach said his player was cleared. The security guards didn't intervene because they took orders from the athletic director, and the athletic director was up in the press box nowhere to be found. The other team's coaches didn't intervene because why would they object to playing against an injured opponent? And Miss Holloway had been fired and escorted off the sideline by assistant coaches who wouldn't meet her eyes. The only person who could stop this was Coach Brennan, and he was the one forcing it to happen. The ref blew his whistle. Play resumed. Caleb lined up at linebacker, and I held my breath. The opposing team's quarterback took the snap and handed it to their running back, who hit the hole right where Caleb was supposed to be. But Caleb's reaction time was off by maybe half a second. Instead of meeting the runner at the line, he was still processing what was happening when the runner cut past him for an 8-yard gain. Coach screamed from the sideline. Donovan, what the hell was that? Get your head in the game. Second down. Same formation. This time Caleb read it correctly and moved toward the right gap, but his legs got tangled with another defender and he went down hard. Not from contact with the other team, just from his own body not working right. The runner picked up another 6 yards. Coach was apoplectic. Donovan, you're killing us out there. Focus. Third down. The quarterback dropped back to pass and Caleb tried to rush him, but his footwork was all wrong. He stumbled after 3 steps and fell to his knees while the quarterback calmly threw a completion for 15 yards and a first down. The opposing team's parents were cheering, sensing blood in the water. Our parents were still yelling for someone to stop the game. I looked around the stadium trying to find an adult who would do something. The refs were focused on the game. The security guards were busy keeping parents off the field. The assistant coaches were following Coach Brennan's lead. The opposing team's staff were coaching their players. The athletic director was still invisible. And my brother was out there playing football with a brain injury, getting worse with every play. Fourth play of the drive, the runner came up the middle again and Caleb tried to make the tackle. But he led with his head, probably because his depth perception was off and he misjudged the distance. Another helmet-to-helmet collision. This one even worse than the first. Caleb dropped like someone had cut his strings. Just collapsed on the field and didn't move at all. The ref threw up the X signal again. Coach jogged onto the field looking annoyed, not concerned. Around me, parents were pulling out their phones. Some filming, some calling 911, some texting. I heard Whitney next to me talking to emergency dispatch. Yes, player down with head injury. Riverside Stadium, 4800 Oakmont Drive. Coach is refusing to let him get medical help. Please hurry. I saw 3 other people making similar calls. The 911 system was probably getting flooded with reports about the same incident. On the field, Coach reached Caleb and tried to wake him up. I could see him shaking Caleb's shoulder, snapping his fingers near his helmet, yelling his name. Caleb's eyes were closed, his body completely limp. Coach finally signaled for Miss Holloway, forgetting he'd just fired her. But she was already running from the parking lot where security had walked her. She had her medical kit and her phone and pure fury on her face. She dropped to her knees next to Caleb and immediately started checking vitals. Her voice carried across the now silent stadium. He's unconscious. Breathing is shallow. Pulse is rapid. I need an ambulance now. Someone called them already. A security guard said. Multiple calls. ETA 3 minutes. Coach tried to regain control. Can we move him to the sideline? She didn't even look at him. Number. Potential spinal injury on top of the severe concussion. He stays exactly where he is until paramedics arrive with proper equipment. Coach looked around at the full stadium, all those eyes watching him, and seemed to realize for the first time that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. He started backing away from Caleb's motionless body. I was just trying to win the game. He had to be okay. He said he felt fine. Miss Holloway's voice was ice. He said that while actively displaying concussion symptoms because you pressured him to minimize his injury. You forced a concussed player back into a contact sport. That's assault. The sirens were audible now, getting closer. 2 ambulances screamed into the stadium parking lot and paramedics came running with a stretcher and medical equipment. They took over from Miss Holloway, carefully removing Caleb's helmet and stabilizing his neck. One of the paramedics was talking to Coach, getting information about the hits, but Coach kept stammering and contradicting himself. The paramedic cut him off. So he took one severe helmet-to-helmet hit, showed clear concussion symptoms, you sent him back in, and he took another severe hit. Coach nodded miserably. The paramedic shook his head in disgust and returned to treating Caleb. They got him loaded onto the stretcher and wheeled toward the ambulance. My mom jumped the fence finally, security guards not even trying to stop her anymore, and ran to climb in the ambulance with Caleb. I'm his mother. I'm coming with him. The paramedic nodded and helped her up. They closed the doors and the ambulance pulled away with lights and sirens, leaving the stadium in shocked silence. The ref eventually called the game, said they'd finish the quarter another day. Both teams walked to their locker rooms. Parents filed out of the stands. The championship qualifier was over, no winner declared, because the game couldn't continue after what everyone had witnessed. Coach Brennan stood alone on the field for a long time, staring at the spot where Caleb had fallen. I got a ride to the hospital from Whitney's mom and found my mom in the emergency room waiting area. She was filling out paperwork with shaking hands. They're running tests. CT scan to check for bleeding in his brain. He woke up in the ambulance, but he didn't know where he was. Couldn't remember the game. Couldn't remember getting hit. The doctor said that's concerning. We sat in those horrible plastic chairs for 2 hours before a doctor came out. Dr. Keene, according to her badge. She looked exhausted and angry. Your son has a severe concussion with coup-contre-coup injury. That means his brain bounced inside his skull from both the initial impact and the secondary impact when he was forced to continue playing. We're seeing swelling and evidence of microhemorrhages. He's stable now, but we're admitting him for observation. The next 24 hours are critical. If you'd brought him in after the first hit, before the second injury, the damage would be significantly less severe. My mom started crying. I tried to get him off the field. His coach wouldn't let me. Dr. Keene pulled out her phone. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Because what you're describing sounds like criminal negligence, and I'm a mandatory reporter for child abuse. This counts. My mom told her everything. About coach dismissing the injury, blocking Miss Holloway from doing her evaluation, firing her when she tried to call 911, forcing Caleb back into the game despite clear symptoms. About the 40 parents who witnessed it all and the multiple 911 calls. About how Caleb took a second severe hit because his brain wasn't working well enough to protect himself. Dr. Keene took notes on everything. Then she made a call right there in the waiting room. Yes, this is Dr. Keene at Mercy General. I'm reporting suspected child endangerment. The victim is a 16-year-old male who was forced to continue playing football after sustaining a head injury, resulting in a second more severe injury. The adult responsible is, she looked at my mom for the name, Coach Dennis Brennan from Riverside High School. Multiple witnesses. Yes, I'll send over the medical records. We couldn't see Caleb that night. He was in the ICU and they were limiting visitors while they monitored his brain swelling. Mom and I sat in the waiting room until midnight when a nurse finally convinced us to go home and rest. We'd barely walked in the door when Mom's phone started ringing. The athletic director, finally. Mom put him on speaker. Mrs. Donovan, this is Paul Whitlock. I'm calling about the incident at tonight's game. I want you to know we take player safety very seriously, and we're conducting a full investigation. Your investigation should have happened before my son took a second hit to his already injured brain. I tried to stop the game. I screamed for help. 40 other parents did the same. None of you did anything. Mr. Whitlock sounded defensive. I was in the press box and didn't have a clear view of what was happening on the sideline. By the time I understood the situation, the play had already occurred. You're lying. You saw everything and chose to do nothing because winning the championship mattered more than my son's safety. Mrs. Donovan, I understand you're upset, but I need to ask that you refrain from speaking to the media about this incident until our investigation is complete. You want me to stay quiet while you figure out how to cover this up? My son is in the ICU with brain damage. I'm talking to anyone who will listen. Mr. Whitlock tried a different approach. We're prepared to offer your family compensation for medical expenses and... She hung up on him. I think he was about to offer us hush money. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. My mom answered cautiously. Mrs. Donovan, my name is Francesca Laurent. I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. I was at the game tonight with my daughter who plays in the marching band. I saw what happened to your son. I'd like to tell his story if you're willing to speak with me. Mom looked at me. I nodded. She needs to tell people what Coach did. Mom agreed to meet with the reporter the next morning. We barely slept. The interview happened in our living room at 8 a.m. Francesca brought a cameraman and had Mom sit on the couch while she asked questions. Mom told her everything, showing her the texts she'd sent to family members during the game, the video that Whitney had taken of Coach blocking Miss Holloway from treating Caleb. Francesca's face got harder as the story went on. She'd been taking notes, but now she set down her pen. Mrs. Donovan, what you're describing is criminal. Has anyone from the school district contacted you about pressing charges? Only the athletic director trying to buy our silence. Francesca turned to her cameraman. Make sure you got all of that on tape. Then back to my mom. This is going to air tonight on the 6 o'clock news. I'm also sending everything to our investigative team. They'll want to dig into how many other times something like this has happened with Coach Brennan. Other times? Mom's voice went sharp. Francesca nodded. In my experience, this level of disregard for player safety doesn't develop overnight. I'm guessing your son isn't the first kid Coach Brennan has pressured to play through an injury, but he might be the first one where the consequences were severe enough that he couldn't hide it. The reporter left and Mom and I went back to the hospital. Caleb was awake now, but confused. He didn't remember the game, didn't remember the hit, kept asking why he was in the hospital and getting frustrated when we explained and he'd forget 5 minutes later. The neurologist said that was normal with this severity of concussion. His short-term memory was scrambled. It might improve over the next few days or it might take weeks. We wouldn't know until the swelling went down. That evening, Mom's phone exploded with texts and calls. The news story had aired. I pulled it up on my phone and watched. The footage Whitney shot was damning. You could see Coach physically blocking Miss Holloway, see him pulling Caleb to his feet, see Caleb stumbling as he walked. The reporter had interviewed other parents who were there, and they all told the same story. Coach Brennan had refused to allow medical treatment for a player with obvious head trauma. The reporter had also found Miss Holloway, who gave a detailed account of being fired for trying to do her job. She showed the medical protocol she was legally required to follow, and explained how Coach had violated every single step. She said she was filing complaints with the State Athletic Association and the Board of Education. By midnight, the story had gone viral. People across the state were sharing it. Parents' groups were calling for Coach Brennan to be fired and criminally charged. Former players were coming forward on social media with their own stories about Coach pressuring them to play through injuries. A kid from 2 years ago said coach made him play on a broken ankle for 3 games before his parents found out. Another said coach had told him a dislocated shoulder was just bruising. The pattern was clear. Coach Brennan had been doing this for years, and the school had either not known or not cared. The next morning, police came to the hospital. 2 detectives who specialized in cases involving minors. They interviewed my mom, interviewed the hospital staff, reviewed Caleb's medical records. Then they went to the school and interviewed players, coaches, parents who'd been at the game. They got copies of Whitney's video and videos from 6 other parents who'd filmed the incident. They interviewed Miss Holloway for 3 hours, going through every detail of what happened. By the end of the week, the district attorney announced charges. Coach Dennis Brennan was charged with reckless endangerment of a minor, assault, and child abuse. The school district was also being investigated for creating an environment that allowed this to happen. The superintendent held a press conference. He tried to claim they had robust safety protocols, and this was an isolated incident with a coach acting against policy. But reporters immediately pushed back with examples of other players who'd been hurt under Coach Brennan's watch. Why hadn't the school noticed the pattern? Why wasn't Miss Holloway's authority to make medical decisions absolute? Why did coach have the power to fire her for doing her job? The superintendent stammered through non-answers. The school board held an emergency meeting and voted to place Coach Brennan on unpaid administrative leave. They also placed athletic director Whitlock on leave for failing to intervene. They hired an outside firm to investigate the entire athletic department. Miss Holloway was reinstated and given a formal apology. The firm's report came out 3 weeks later, and it was brutal. They'd found that Coach Brennan had a pattern of prioritizing wins over player safety going back at least 8 years. Multiple players had sustained injuries that weren't properly treated. Parents had complained to the athletic director at least 15 times, but no action was ever taken. The report recommended firing Coach Brennan, firing athletic director Whitlock, and implementing sweeping reforms to how athletic injuries were handled. Meanwhile, Caleb was slowly getting better. The memory issues improved after a week, though he still had gaps. He couldn't remember the game or most of that day. The doctor said that was probably permanent. His brain had been too scrambled during those events to lay down proper memories. He had constant headaches that responded poorly to medication, light and noise sensitivity that made school impossible, balance issues that physical therapy was helping with gradually. The neurologist said full recovery could take 6 months to a year, if it happened at all. Some symptoms might be permanent. Caleb definitely couldn't play football again. One more concussion could be catastrophic or fatal. My mom cried when the doctor explained that. Not because Caleb couldn't play, but because she was realizing how close we'd come to losing him completely. If that second hit had been slightly different, if his brain had swollen just a little more, we'd be planning a funeral instead of a recovery. The criminal trial started in January, 4 months after the incident. Coach Brennan's lawyer tried to argue that he'd made a judgment call as an experienced coach, that he'd believed Caleb was fit to play, that the injury was an unfortunate accident but not criminal. The prosecutor destroyed that defense. She brought in Miss Holloway, who testified about the concussion protocol coach had ignored. She brought in Dr. Keene, who explained the medical evidence of 2 separate impacts and how the second was preventable. She played the videos showing coach blocking medical care and firing the trainer. She brought in 4 former players who testified about coach pressuring them to play through injuries. One kid, now in college, testified that coach had told him a broken rib was just bruising and made him play through it. The rib had punctured his lung during a game. He'd collapsed on the field and been hospitalized for a week. His parents had complained to the school, but nothing happened. The most powerful testimony came from Caleb himself. He'd recovered enough to take the stand, though he still wore sunglasses because of light sensitivity. The prosecutor asked him what he remembered about that night. Not much. I remember the first hit, and feeling wrong after. Like I was watching everything through a fog. I remember coach asking me questions, but I couldn't focus enough to answer properly. I remember throwing up and being embarrassed about it. Then it gets really blurry. I remember coach telling me to be tough and get back in the game, but I didn't feel like I could argue. He's the coach. You do what he says. I remember being scared that I couldn't think straight, but not knowing how to tell anyone. Then nothing until I woke up in the hospital. Did you want to keep playing? Number. I felt terrible. But coach said I was fine, so I thought maybe I was just being weak. Did you feel pressured to play? Yes. Coach makes it clear that if you're not tough enough, you don't deserve to be on the team. Guys who sit out injuries get benched or kicked off the team. Everyone knows that. So when he said I was fine to play, I believed him because he's the authority figure, and I didn't want to let down my team. The defense attorney tried to suggest that Caleb could have refused to play, that no one forced him. But Caleb shut that down. I was 16 years old with a brain injury that impaired my judgment. Coach was a 50-year-old adult who ignored medical professionals telling him I was hurt. How is that my responsibility? The courtroom was silent. Even coach's lawyer seemed to realize he'd lost. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on all charges. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, multiple people gave impact statements. My mom talked about how our family had been traumatized watching Caleb's injury and the aftermath. Miss Holloway talked about how she'd been fired for trying to protect a child and how that had made her question her career. Dr. Keene talked about treating pediatric brain injuries and how preventable Caleb's second injury had been. 4 former players talked about injuries they'd played through because coach pressured them. And Caleb talked about his ongoing symptoms, how he still couldn't read for more than 30 minutes without severe headaches, how loud noises made him nauseous, how he'd had to leave the robotics club he loved because he couldn't focus on complex tasks anymore, how he'd lost his junior year of high school to recovery and might never fully get back to who he was before. The judge listened to everything and then addressed Coach Brennan directly. You were in a position of trust and authority over minor children. You prioritized winning a football game over a child's safety. You ignored medical professionals. You fired a trainer for trying to do her job. You pressured an injured child to continue playing a dangerous contact sport, resulting in significant and lasting harm. Your actions show a pattern of putting athletic success above the welfare of the children in your care. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in prison, suspended after 2 years with 3 years probation. You're also permanently barred from coaching or working with children in any capacity. Coach's face went white. His lawyer immediately filed an appeal, but it was denied. Coach Brennan reported to prison 3 weeks later. The school district settled a civil lawsuit with our family for an amount that was sealed by agreement, but it was enough to cover all of Caleb's medical bills and future treatment, plus fund his college education. They also settled with 3 other former players and their families. The total payout was reportedly over $3 million. More importantly, the district implemented new policies. Athletic trainers now had absolute authority over medical decisions and couldn't be overridden by coaches. Any player showing concussion symptoms had to be removed from play immediately and couldn't return without written clearance from a doctor. Parents had the right to remove their children from play for any reason without consequences. And all coaches had to complete annual training on concussion protocols with testing to verify understanding. Ms. Holloway was promoted to head athletic trainer for the entire district and given authority to enforce these policies across all schools. She took the job seriously, showing up to games and practices unannounced to make sure coaches were following protocol. Several coaches complained about her being too strict. She didn't care. Better a coach annoyed than a kid brain damaged. The story continued to spread nationally. News outlets across the country picked it up. Sports safety organizations used it as an example of everything wrong with youth sports culture. Several states passed laws specifically because of Caleb's case, laws that gave athletic trainers final say over medical decisions and established criminal penalties for coaches who violated concussion protocols. The laws were informally called Caleb's Laws, though they didn't officially have that name. Youth football participation dropped nationwide as parents reconsidered the risks. Caleb slowly continued improving. By his senior year, about 18 months after the injury, he was mostly functional. The headaches were less frequent. He could tolerate normal noise levels again. His memory was basically back to normal, though he still had gaps around the injury. He'd learned to manage his symptoms and work around his limitations. He couldn't play contact sports anymore, but he'd never really wanted to go back to football anyway. He'd started playing because coach recruited him in middle school and made it seem like football was the only path to success. Now he focused on robotics and computer science, things he'd always been interested in but had sacrificed for football. He was accepted to a good engineering program at a state university with scholarships that covered most of his costs. He was going to be okay. Different than he was before, but okay. The hardest part was watching other parents still push their kids in sports. We'd go to games and see coaches yelling at injured players to tough it out, see parents pressuring kids to keep playing through pain. The culture hadn't fully changed despite the new laws, but slowly more people were speaking up. More parents were pulling kids from games when they got hurt. More trainers were standing up to coaches. More kids were trusting their own bodies instead of believing adults who told them they were fine. The message was spreading. Wins weren't worth brain damage. Championships weren't worth lifelong disability. Sports were supposed to enrich kids' lives, not destroy them. 2 years after the incident, I was invited to speak at a sports safety conference. I was 17 by then, about to start my senior year. They wanted me to talk about witnessing my brother's injury and how it felt to be powerless while adults made dangerous decisions. I almost said no because talking about that night still made me feel sick. But then I thought about all the kids who might be in similar situations, who might see adults doing something wrong and not know if they should speak up. So I agreed. I stood on that stage in front of about 200 coaches, trainers, administrators, and parents. I told them about watching Caleb hit the ground and immediately knowing something was wrong, about screaming for help while coach blocked everyone from providing it, about the terrible choice Julian faced, standing up and getting benched or staying silent and watching his friend get hurt, about how 40 parents called 911, but none of us could get onto the field to physically stop what was happening, about the moment Caleb collapsed the second time, and I thought we'd lost him. When I finished, the room was dead silent. Then a coach in the third row stood up. He was maybe 50, probably coached for decades. He looked directly at me and said something I'll never forget. I was Dennis Brennan. Not literally, but I coached like him. Pushed kids to play through pain. Valued toughness over safety. Dismissed injuries as weakness. I thought I was making them strong. Your story made me realize I was hurting them. I changed everything about how I coach after your brother's case became public. I'm grateful no kid on my team had to go through what Caleb did for me to learn that lesson. Several other coaches nodded in agreement. After my speech, a woman approached me. She was maybe 35, athletic build, serious expression. My name is Kendra Hayes. I'm a sports psychologist and I work with youth athletes. I want to talk to you about something called moral courage. That's what you and the other kids showed that night when you kept trying to help your brother despite adults telling you to stop. Most people think courage is physical, doing something dangerous or difficult. But moral courage is standing up for what's right even when authority figures tell you you're wrong. That's harder. That's rarer. And it's what changes systems. She handed me her card. I'm working on a training program for young athletes about recognizing dangerous situations and finding their voice to push back against adults who are making bad calls. Would you be willing to help develop it? Share what you learned about when to trust your instincts over authority figures? I took the card and agreed. Over the next year, I worked with Kendra and her team to create a program called Speak Up, Save Lives. We taught kids how to recognize medical emergencies, understand concussion symptoms, and advocate for themselves and teammates when coaches or parents were pushing too hard. We gave them language to use like, I don't feel safe continuing, and I need to see a trainer before playing more. We taught them that protecting their bodies wasn't weakness, it was intelligence. We taught them that real toughness was having the courage to stop when something was wrong, not playing through preventable injuries. The program was implemented in 20 school districts in our state and was spreading to others. Thousands of kids were learning these skills, learning to trust themselves, learning that their safety mattered more than any game. Caleb graduated high school with honors despite missing significant time during his junior year. At graduation, he was awarded the district's first ever Athletic Courage Award, created specifically for him. The award recognized student athletes who prioritized health and safety over competitive success. Future winners would be students who spoke up about injuries, helped injured teammates, or stood up to coaches pushing dangerous practices. Caleb gave a speech when he accepted the award. He talked about how much he'd loved football before the injury, how he'd dreamed of playing in college, how that dream had died on the field that night. But he said something unexpected. He said the injury, as terrible as it was, had freed him from a pressure he hadn't realized he was under. The pressure to sacrifice everything for a sport, to tie his worth to his athletic performance, to believe that his value as a person depended on being tough and never showing weakness. Losing football had forced him to figure out who he was beyond being an athlete, and he'd discovered he was someone he liked better, someone interested in building things and solving problems and helping people, someone who didn't need to prove his toughness by ignoring his body's warning signals. The injury taught me, he said, that your health is not something you gamble with. Your brain is not something you sacrifice for a trophy. Your future is not worth trading for one season of glory. I wish I'd learned that lesson differently, but I'm grateful I survived to learn it at all. The auditorium gave him a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Coach Brennan was released from prison after serving 2 years. He came out to a world that had completely changed on youth sports safety. His name had become synonymous with everything wrong with competitive athletics. He couldn't get a job coaching, couldn't get hired at sports facilities or schools. Last I heard, he was working retail somewhere 2 states away, living quietly, trying to stay out of public attention. Some people said that was too harsh, that he'd paid his debt to society and deserved a second chance. But I remembered my brother lying motionless on that field, remembered months of watching him struggle with headaches and memory issues, remembered how close we'd come to losing him, and I thought 2 years in prison was getting off easy compared to what Caleb had gone through. The assistant coaches who'd helped coach that night faced consequences too. None were charged criminally, but several were fired or resigned under pressure. The one who'd physically escorted Miss Holloway off the sideline never coached again. Athletic director Whitlock was fired and blacklisted from education jobs. The school board president who'd initially defended the school resigned after public pressure. The system that had enabled Coach Brennan for so long was being dismantled piece by piece. But change was slow. 3 years after Caleb's injury, there was another case in a different state. A coach pressured a kid to play through a suspected broken arm. The arm wasn't broken, just badly sprained, but the principle was the same, prioritizing the game over the player's well-being. That coach was fired immediately and faced criminal charges, which showed the culture was shifting. But it also showed we hadn't fully solved the problem. The drive to win, to succeed, to prove dominance was still there. It would always be there in competitive sports. The challenge was channeling it in ways that didn't destroy kids in the process. I started college with a plan to study sports medicine and work as an athletic trainer like Miss Holloway. I wanted to be someone who could stand between coaches and players, who could be the voice of medical reason when competitive pressures got too high. My first semester, I volunteered with the training staff at football games. I watched them work, saw how they managed injuries, learned the protocols. One game, a player took a hard hit and stayed down. The trainer immediately ran onto the field. The coach tried to wave him back, said the player was fine. The trainer ignored him completely, knelt next to the player, ran through concussion protocol, and pulled him from the game despite the coach's protests. The coach yelled. The trainer didn't care. The player was done for the night and couldn't return without medical clearance. Exactly how it should have been with Caleb. After the game, I approached that trainer. His name was Marcus Townsend, and he'd been doing this for 20 years. I told him about my brother, and he nodded slowly. I remember that case. That's actually why I'm so strict about the protocols now. I used to be more willing to compromise with coaches, give them the benefit of the doubt. After what happened to your brother became public, I realized I'd been wrong. Medical decisions are medical decisions. Coaches don't get a vote. I asked him if coaches ever push back. All the time, he said. But here's what I tell them. You hired me to keep your players safe. If you don't want me doing that job, fire me. But while I'm here, I'm going to protect these kids even if it costs you games. And if you fire me for it, I'll make sure everyone knows why. Most coaches back down after that. And the ones who don't, well, they don't coach here very long. Caleb's doing well now, 5 years after the injury. He graduated college with an engineering degree. He works for a tech company developing safety equipment, including better helmet designs that might prevent injuries like his. He still has occasional headaches and some lingering light sensitivity, but he's learned to manage it. He runs a nonprofit on the side that provides free concussion screenings for youth athletes whose families can't afford them. He speaks at schools and sports events about his experience. He's turned his trauma into purpose, which I think is the healthiest possible outcome. Mom still has nightmares about that night. She'll wake up sometimes saying she can hear the sound of Caleb hitting the ground. She goes to therapy for it. She's become a fierce advocate for sports safety reforms, serving on committees and speaking at board meetings. She's made it her mission to make sure no other parent watches helplessly while their child gets hurt and adults do nothing to stop it. As for me, I did become an athletic trainer. I work at a high school now, same job Miss Holloway had. And every game, every practice, I remember what I saw happen to Caleb. When a player shows any sign of injury, I don't care what the coach says. I don't care what the score is. I don't care if it's the championship game. That player comes out and gets evaluated properly. Period. I've been yelled at by coaches, had parents complain that I'm too cautious, but I sleep well at night knowing I've never sent an injured kid back into a game. And in 5 years of doing this job, I've pulled maybe 20 players who probably would have kept playing under a different trainer. 3 of them had concussions they didn't realize were that serious. 1 had a broken bone he thought was just bruised. 2 had heart conditions we caught before they became emergencies. I probably saved those kids from serious injuries, maybe saved their lives. And that matters more than any game we might have won with them playing hurt. The culture is changing. Slowly. Not fast enough, but it's happening. More coaches are getting trained on concussion protocols. More parents are educated about warning signs. More kids are empowered to speak up when something feels wrong. More trainers have the authority to make medical decisions without interference. Caleb's case was a catalyst for a lot of that change. His injury was so public, so well documented, so clearly preventable that it became impossible to ignore. It showed people what could happen when winning mattered more than safety. When adults failed to protect kids in their care. When the system enabled dangerous behavior instead of stopping it. 5 years later, we're still dealing with the aftermath. Still fighting to change a culture that's been developing for decades. But we're making progress. And every kid who gets pulled from a game for a possible concussion, every coach who prioritizes player safety over winning, every trainer who stands up to pressure, every parent who trusts their instincts, that's evidence the system is getting better. It's not perfect. It never will be. But it's better than it was. And it's better than it was because people saw what happened to Caleb and decided it could never happen again. Not on their watch, not to their kids, Not in their schools. That's his legacy. That's what came from those terrible 3 minutes when he was forced to play with a brain injury. He changed youth sports, made them safer, saved kids he'll never meet from injuries they'll never sustain. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.